Hello, and thank you for joining us for our For Flight for Passengers and Companions webinar. We first presented this as a seminar at this year's AirVenture. We received a lot of positive feedback, so we thought it best to present this a second time as a webinar in the hopes of reaching a wider audience. To give you all a little background about the origins of this presentation, at AirVenture a couple years back, we were doing a presentation in our booth, and there was an individual who came to ask us some pretty intense questions. He was very into the back and forth we had about ForeFlight. And me and a coworker of mine looked to the side and saw that this person's spouse was reading a brochure. And we watched them read a brochure. We watched them read the same brochure a second time and then a third time. And then we realized that this was one of the most bored people we've ever seen in our lives. And we thought it would be nice to have some sort of content to encourage those folks who aren't necessarily heavy users of the product, but are flying frequently. So this is intended, the scope of this is for those who are regularly flying, but might not always be the PIC. They might be flying with a friend, a spouse, significant other, whatever, and they'd like to be a little more involved. So using ForeFlight to assist with flight planning prior to departure, you'll use some of the tools in ForeFlight to increase situational awareness in the cockpit, and then leverage ForeFlight features to assist in the event of an emergency. So that's the goal we have for today. My name is Jeremy Lippard. I'm a member of the customer education team here at ForeFlight. If you've been to AirVenture or Sun and Fun in the last couple of years, you've probably interacted with me at a seminar or in our booth. And my job here at ForeFlight is to create and deliver trainings and education content like this. What I'm going to cover today, this is my agenda for this webinar, is some basic pre-flight features. These will include things like flight planning, weather briefings, flight sharing between users, and using checklists to assist with pre-flight preparation. Our en route features will focus on using packed data to assist with monitoring NOTAMs and weather, as well as using ADS-B connected tools to monitor live traffic and live weather, and identifying and assisting with en route frequency changes. Finally, we'll look at how ForeFlight can be used to assist in the event of an emergency. I want to take a brief moment to just talk about using ForeFlight in the cockpit. The graphics for this presentation will be primarily showing an iPad in landscape view. That's what you're seeing on the left-hand side of the screen now. But many of us do fly with the device in portrait mode. The features and the functions of the two are identical to one another. The primary difference is that the navigation toolbar across the bottom of the screen will contain more buttons in landscape view than in portrait view. Any buttons you do not see along the bottom of the screen can be found by tapping on the More button, which will always be located in the lower right-hand corner. For those of you who may be using an iPhone, you'll notice there are even fewer buttons displayed in the navigation toolbar. Just like on the iPad, tapping on the More button will allow you to access any feature in ForeFlight. The navigation toolbar will be hidden in landscape mode, as you're seeing on the right-hand side of the screen, in order to maximize my view of the map or any other content I may be looking at. A ForeFlight subscription supports logging on up to 3 devices, so it is possible, maybe it's probable, that you may be using an iPhone while the PIC is using an iPad, but both users will have access to the same tools and features. We'll start with our basic pre-flight features that I alluded to at the very beginning. There are several different features in ForeFlight that we can use to assist with pre-flight planning and preparation. I'll be speaking about several features in ForeFlight during this webinar, and I want to draw your attention to the lower right-hand side of my screen. You can see that I have icons displaying the subscription tiers that ForeFlight offers. If I speak about a feature that is only available at certain tier levels, you'll see that tier highlighted and the others grayed out. The vast majority of what I will be speaking about is available at every subscription level, but it will be called out when I'm speaking about something that is an exception. The very first feature I'd like to look at is our checklist feature. So if you'd like to follow along with me, go ahead and tap on the checklist tab across the bottom of the screen. You'll notice I have this little animation letting you know exactly where it is in the application that I am interacting with. So if you'd like to follow along, hopefully you can do so. So I've gone ahead and I've tapped on my checklist tab along the bottom of the screen. If you don't see that checklist tab, by the way, if you tap on more, you'll be able to find it there. In the checklist screen, on the left-hand side, we can see all of the checklists that we've added to our account. On the right-hand side will be the current checklist that you're viewing. So we can see from the left-hand side, I'm looking at a checklist for my Tomahawk. And on the right-hand side, I can see that this is my starting engine checklist for my Tomahawk. If you don't see your aircraft's checklist displayed, it's most likely because you haven't yet added it to your account. If you'd like to add that to your account, you can do so by clicking on, or tapping on rather, the plus sign on the left-hand side of the screen. And here we'll be able to see a menu of checklists that ForeFlight has created based on the POH of common general aviation aircraft. You'll see a searchable, browsable list for all of the pre-built checklists available in ForeFlight. In my example today, I'm going to go ahead and add a Cessna 172S with a G1000. Once you've added your aircraft, go ahead and open up that aircraft's checklist, and we can start our pre-flight inspection and any other processes. On the left-hand side, you'll see all of the available checklists for that aircraft. On the right-hand side, we can interact with the selected checklist. So in this example, this is the pre-flight inspection checklist for the aircraft we just added. And this is designed to be as user-friendly and intuitive as possible. You can toggle between checklist categories, normal, abnormal, or emergency, using the tabs at left. And across the top, tapping checklist will return you back to your aircraft selection. The share button, that looks like the box with the little up arrow coming out of it, that will allow you to share any custom checklists with other ForeFlight users. Edit allows you to edit lists and subgroups for this checklist. And the emergency button will immediately open up an emergency checklist for this aircraft. We can use the buttons across the bottom to follow along with the selected checklist. For each individual checklist item, you can tap on the radial buttons to the left of those items, or simply tap on check as you go through the checklist. So we can see our first item here is the pitot tube cover. We're checking for pitot blockage, and I can either tap that radial button to the left of that, or just go ahead and tap on check. I will progress through my pre-flight inspection. It's all pretty straightforward. And these are all, again, just generic checklists taken from an aircraft's POH. I may want to edit a checklist to match my specific aircraft and or my specific pre-flight routine. I'll go ahead and tap on the edit button in the upper right-hand corner. And from the checklist edit screen, I can remove items that don't apply to my aircraft by tapping on that red delete button. The items can be reordered from this screen as well. On the right-hand side of each checklist item, you'll see 3 horizontal lines. That's the handle. If you tap on that handle and hold it, you can drag those to reorder them within the checklist. But what I would like to do is add some custom items. So to do that, I'll tap on New Check Item along the bottom. And here I've added an item to check that my backup battery is charged. There is no limit to how many custom items can be added to a checklist. And before I continue, I'll tap on Save. Again, I can add as many custom checklist items as I'd like, or I can make a custom checklist. Once added to a checklist, this item can be interacted with the exact same way I would interact with any checklist item. I can tap on check or tap on the radial button to the left. Using this workflow, you can fully customize or even create a new custom checklist to best match how you fly. Personally, I've made a separate checklist that I use before I leave the house. It's called Before I Leave the House. And it includes things like making sure my backup radio has batteries, that I've received my weather briefing, that ForeFlight is up to date, that my iPad is charged. And it's something I do just as a last minute check before I drive over to the airport to make sure I have everything I'll need for that day's flight. And it's just a custom checklist that I've created, and I've added it to my checklist tab. We'll move on from checklists to some other basic pre-flight tools available in ForeFlight. If you do have any additional questions about checklists as I go forward or about any topic, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A tab on the webinar. If we didn't mention it earlier, it's probably a good idea to ask your questions as they occur to you. These webinars, we tend to get a lot of questions towards the end, and it's more difficult to make sure we get to all of them. So if you do have a question about anything that I'm talking about, it's for the best to ask that question as soon as it occurs to you rather than waiting towards the end of our allotted time. So basic flight planning, this can be done from the Maps tab or the Flights tab on ForeFlight Mobile. What I'm going to do is walk through a demonstration of looking at a planned flight from my home airport, and then some of the pre-flight tools I have available to assist in planning, or if I just want to give myself more information prior to departure. To view a pre-planned flight, I'll go ahead and open up my Flights tab. And here I can see all of my saved flights displayed. At the top is my cross country from my home airport into Midland, Texas. And for my scenario, I'm assuming this was planned by our by our PIC. And in order to help with the planning, I want to have access to this flight plan as well. There are a few ways we can quickly share flight plans to other ForeFlight users. This workflow I'll demonstrate is best when you are trying to share flight information to users on a different account. If you're using a device that's on the same account, it's actually easier, and I'll show what that looks like as well. But if we did want to share this flight with users on a different account, we could do that by tapping on the share button on the upper right-hand corner. Again, that looks like the box with the up arrow coming out of it. And this will allow you to send this flight to another user via airdrop, email. There's several different methods. You can do this from the Maps tab as well. So from the Maps tab, we can also tap on that share button. So that share button, again, it's the little box with the up arrow coming out of it. Once you tap on that share button, you'll see your options to share this flight. If you are connected to the same Wi-Fi network as another ForeFlight user, you'll see that user's device displayed, and you can tap on that to quickly share a flight with another user on the same Wi-Fi network. Generally speaking, this would be done prior to leaving the house or leaving the FBO because it does require Wi-Fi. However, this can also be done in the cockpit if both users are connected to a Wi-Fi ADS-B receiver like the Sentry or Sentry Plus. What is probably a more common occurrence is that you and the PIC don't have separate ForeFlight accounts. We always recommend, even when flying alone, to fly with a backup device in the cockpit, and your account does allow for up to 3 devices. So there's no reason why the PIC and the passenger or their companion or the co-pilot can't both be using devices on the same account at the same time. As long as both devices have an active internet connection, note at the top it says Wi-Fi is required. As long as both devices have an active internet connection, they will sync to one another. In this example, the co-pilot can see my planned flight without any additional actions or workflow. So the scenario I've imagined here is my PIC has planned a flight on his or her device, and they are using the iPad. As the passenger, I would like to follow along with this flight, and I have an iPhone. I'll log into the same ForeFlight account, and as long as we have internet, we're both able to see that same flight. In this example, it looks like the PIC forgot to add baggage to our flight plan. So there are 2 people. I see our average weights there. But we do have some bags with us, and the PIC has not added this to our flight plan. So as a result, our performance calculations may be inaccurate. So as a co-pilot, as a passenger, as a companion, I can make those adjustments on a backup device. The PIC doesn't need to do that. So on my iPhone, again, I'm pretending that's my backup device in this scenario, I'll go ahead and click on that cargo field, and I'll make those changes. I'm going to say that we have 50 pounds of cargo. As long as both of my devices are still connected to the internet, that change will sync across both devices. So this may save some time for the PIC. It may just be something that they just honestly overlooked, and you just want to make sure that our performance calculations are accurate and are correct. As a passenger or a co-pilot or a companion, you may want to also access a weather briefing, and that briefing will sync across devices. You'll notice again, Wi-Fi is required to make sure you can pull, or data connection is required to make sure you can pull down this briefing. To start, I'm going to go ahead and tap on briefing. It'll take a moment to pull down the briefing for our flight. And the briefing that is generated is an official weather briefing in accordance with CFR Part 91-103. It contains all of my weather forecast information for my planned flight. I do want to point out, if you look at the very bottom, there is a timestamp that tells you when this information was generated. So if as a passenger or as a co-pilot, you pull this information onto the backup device, when the PIC reads it, they should reference that to make sure that information is as current as they would like it to be. If we scroll down, we can also see all of our relevant comms information, frequencies, anything that we might need for this flight. If I prefer, again, this is mostly a matter of personal preference, but if I prefer, I might want to, rather than just accessing this information on my iPhone or iPad, I may want to print a hard copy. And I can do that by tapping on the Send To icon in the upper right-hand corner. And I can choose whatever my sharing and sending options are. So here I can airdrop this to somebody, email this to somebody. The markup option allows me to, in my iPhone or iPad, make annotations on the PDF document. What I want to do is just print a hard copy of this. If I'd like to view this planned flight on the map, I'm going to go ahead and send my planned flight over to the Maps tab. I'll do that by tapping again on my Send To icon. The pop-up that appears gives me my options. I'm going to go ahead and tap on Map, and I can see my route displayed on my map. I'm going to preview some other weather and data products, and I'm going to start by looking at what's available in my map layer selector. So I'll go ahead and tap on my map layer selector. And for my example, what you're seeing on my screen may differ from what you see on your screen, because what's available will vary with your subscription tier as well as your region. So as a for-flight employee, I have a lot more regions enabled than probably the average user does, and I also have all of the basic pro and performance features enabled. So the first thing I want to look at is my reported turbulence layer. And I'll look at that by tapping on that. And reported turbulence is a newer feature. It was released in April of this year that utilizes data from the Sentry and Sentry Plus devices to display a visual representation of turbulence intensity at multiple altitudes. So maybe I'm just uncomfortable flying through bumpy air, and I just want to get a sneak peek of how bumpy is this flight going to be. Is there another path we can take? Maybe it makes sense to delay a couple hours or leave a couple of hours earlier. So that could be one usage that a passenger or a companion or co-pilot gets out of the reported turbulence layer. The reported turbulence for altitudes up to 14,000 feet is available for all Pro and Performance Plus users who register their Sentry device at forflight.com using the Register a New Sentry button. So this is the first feature I'm looking at that is not available to all subscription tiers. And if you look at the lower right, you'll see Performance and Pro Plus are highlighted and Basic Plus is grayed out. So again, as I go through, if you have a question about where a feature is available on a subscription, just look in the lower right-hand corner and that should give you clarification on that. On any device, we can swap between weather products to increase our pre-flight situational awareness, and I'll do that by opening up my map layer selector again. In this example, I've enabled my clouds layer, and this will show Pro and Performance Plus customers the global forecast for cloud coverage. This forecast is run hourly and is available for up to 18 hours in the future. So here it looks like at 8,000 feet, it looks like we do have some clouds we may be traveling through on our first leg of our flight. In this example, I've enabled my temporary flight restriction layer, and this displays TFRs disseminated by the FAA that include graphical shape information. In this example, I'm going to zoom in So now I can see that our route, as planned, may violate that TFR, and I want to just make sure the PIC is aware. So once, if they're not aware, maybe just looking at this before the flight and bringing their attention to it, they will be able to pull up detailed information about this TFR and, if necessary, adjust their route. Lastly, I want to look at my radar layer. This is our basic radar layer that uses internet data, is updated every 5 minutes, and displays approximately 55 minutes of radar data to animate. And again, it looks like on our second leg here, we may have some weather to contend with. So those are an overview of some of the pre-flight features that the passenger companion co-pilot can take a look at to maybe assist the PIC with their pre-flight planning. We want to transition now into some en route features, and I'll start with en route weather. What I want to look at first is how we can pack data for a flight. So weather data, along with some other information, can be stored for a flight via the pack feature. The pack feature is found at the bottom of a flight's information in the flights tab. So I've gone back to my flights tab, and I've just scrolled down till I see the pack tab. And Wi-Fi is required. Their data connection is required to download this information. If I'd like to proceed and pack for this flight, I'll go ahead and tap on that. And this can be done when viewing the flight on the map view as well. On the map view, there's a suitcase-shaped icon that can be tapped to pack for that flight. So when you, either on the Maps tab or the Flights tab, when you tap on Pack, ForeFlight will prompt you to download weather and other information for a corridor that's 25 nautical miles left and right of your planned route. This does require a data connection, so you should always complete this prior to departure, prior to losing that data connection. In fact, this should be completed as close to departure as possible. And once completed, this will allow for the packed weather and data to be available en route. Packing will also download any en route charts that have not already been downloaded to your device. There is a difference in what is available to pack based on your subscription, but all subscription tiers can download weather forecasts, AirMets, SIGMETs, CWAs, NOTAMs, and fuel prices. Once we're ready to continue, you can also see the size of this download is presented here. I'll go ahead and tap on Pack. Once I'm finished, I'll see a notification that I am all packed. So once packed, this data is accessible en route the same way you would access other data normally. The packed data will become obsolete after a period of time. And if you pack more than 3 hours from your estimated time of departure, you should really plan on packing updated data just prior to departure. Again, it's best practice to do this as close to your departure as possible. I mentioned earlier that I have a custom before I leave the house checklist. My last item on the before I leave the house checklist is pack for the flight, because I know I won't have data. The FBO I operate on doesn't have very good Wi-Fi. So I know I won't have data after I leave the house. So make sure I do this just before I leave. Packing is not a required step when you're planning in ForeFlight, but it is recommended. In this example here, you can see how the packed data in this example, it is our dynamic wind layer, this is available to performance subscribers, is displayed en route. The areas to the east, west, and north of this section that read data not available, those are the ones that were not packed based on my route corridor. So during flight, as a passenger, you may like some more information about how much longer you can expect to be airborne. The expected time of arrival and the expected time en route can be viewed in the flights tabs, those tabs we looked at earlier. You could always just check those for a preview of how long the flight will be. But if you'd like a more accurate real-time, are we there yet tool, there are some other options available to you in ForeFlight. Before I do that, as a passenger, so here we are, we've already departed. We're en route from my home airport into Midland. As a passenger, maybe I'm not comfortable using an aeronautical map or viewing a sectional or something like that, or maybe you just prefer a different view. So I'm going to change my base map here. In this example, I'm going to change this to show an aerial or a satellite view. And I'll do that by the same way I viewed my radar earlier. I'm going to open my map layer selector. And the options I have for my charts and maps, again, these will vary based on your account and region. For now, I'm interested in my aerial imagery. So I'll go ahead and tap on that. And once enabled, this will display a map view. Just like any other map, this can be panned and zoomed. And this might be more familiar to you if you're used to using something like Google Maps. This also will more closely resemble the landscape you can see out of the cockpit window. Additionally, because my aeronautical map is still enabled, all of my aeronautical elements, like airports, can still be interacted with if I need them. I mentioned how we can quickly see how much time left we have on our flight. And there's a couple different ways we can do that, but the one way I want to show you is I'm going to open up my instrument panel. And the instrument panel can be opened by tapping the button across the top that resembles an airspeed indicator. The number of instruments displayed will vary based on which device you are using and whether or not you're in landscape or portrait mode. These instruments can be customized based on your preference by tapping on any instrument, and you'll see a menu pop up that will give you options to put in a new instrument and replace the one that you've tapped on. Currently, from left to right, my instruments are distance to my next waypoint, my nearest airport, that can be very useful in the event of an emergency diversion, ground speed, altitude, track, the accuracy of my GPS, the expected time en route to my destination, my current position, and the expected time en route to my next waypoint. So if you have never done it or haven't done it in a while, feel free to open up the instrument panel and adjust this to match your preferences and the way you would like to see these presented in flight. A moment ago, I looked at how packed weather can be viewed in flight. But if you are connected to an ADS-B receiver like the Sentry in the cockpit, you'll have access to dynamic and real-time weather and traffic information in flight. Also, if you are using a Sentry device in the cockpit, both the PIC's device and the passenger's device can be connected simultaneously and both receive real-time traffic and weather to increase situational awareness. The Sentry connects via your device's Wi-Fi connection, and this will allow you to receive real-time traffic and weather and share flight plans and information with one another via cockpit sharing. Even though the Sentry uses your Wi-Fi connection, you will not receive internet data. It is not the same Wi-Fi connection that you have at home or in the office and is limited to specific functions within ForeFlight. En route, if you are connected to an ADS-B like the Sentry or a SiriusXM weather receiver, you will be able to view live weather data. In this example, I'm viewing live ADS-B radar, and we can see we have some pretty rough weather moving into our destination. So it looks like there's a storm coming from the west into Midland. So because of that, I may want to, or the PIC may want to, quickly divert and wait out this storm. Maybe one or both of us is uncomfortable flying into this weather. So we can do that by tapping on any airport to pull up the information and weather for that airport. In the example that I'm showing here, I've just overflown past San Angelo. So I've got a pretty good idea that the weather was nice or nice enough as I recently flew past that area. So to pull up that information for this or any airport, I'll just go ahead and tap on that. And my information pane slides in from the right-hand side. And I can see that the weather at San Angelo looks like it's clear. It was reported as of 11 minutes ago. So in this case, it's a very recent report. Again, I had just flown past this airport, so I had a pretty good idea it was nice anyway. But what I want now, I can see the weather's fine, or I knew the weather was fine. I want to pull up my comms information and pass that on to my PIC, or I can make those frequency changes from the right seat as needed. So I'll go ahead and tap on that info tab. And I can see on my information tab, I can see my ATIS and tower frequencies. And I can quickly adjust my route by tapping on Direct To. And depending on your in-cockpit avionics, as I change this flight plan, I can then push that to the panel from either my device or the PIC's device. So if you're connected to one another via something like a Sentry that connects via Wi-Fi, as you make changes on one device, it will be reflected on the other device. And then depending on your onboard avionics, this can be pushed to the panel. So I've pulled up my comms information on the right-hand side. You can see my tower. I can see my ATIS. I'm going to assume I've already started making those calls, or I've already started changing the frequencies and my PIC has started making those calls. I'm going to go ahead and start editing my route. I'll just tap on Direct To. And I can see that route has replaced everything else that was in my flight plan drawer. I now have a direct route from my current position back to San Angelo. In my scenario, again, I've overflown nearby this airport, but for the sake of explanation, I'm going to assume I've never landed at this airport before. So I'd like to give the PIC some additional awareness as they're making their diversion. So maybe they've started making their calls. Maybe they're starting to get turned into the direction of San Angelo, but I want to give them as much information as possible. Again, if I'm connected via an onboard Wi-Fi like a Sentry, this information will be able to sync from device to device. So what I would like to do is pull up the traffic pattern for this airport. I'll go ahead and tap on procedures. I see all my available procedures here. The only one I'm interested though is traffic pattern. So I'll go ahead and tap on traffic pattern. And if I'm receiving current weather, I'll see which runway has the most favorable winds, or if I've already got information from tower, I can just select the runway that they've told me to use. Here, I'm going to select runway 18 because it has the best wind, and I'm going to assume this is what this is what is currently in use at that airport as well. So I'll tap on that runway. And based on my instructions, I've been told to make a cross midfield direct approach. So I'll go ahead and tap on that pattern. You'll see that pattern is displayed on this little inset map. I don't call it out, but I want to call it out now. At the very top, you'll notice the traffic pattern altitude is also displayed there. So I could quickly pull that up and let the PIC know that they should be approaching at the pattern altitude. So I'm going to add this to my route. I'll do that by tapping on Add to Route. And I can see this approach and traffic pattern is displayed. I'll zoom in a little bit to get a little more clarity. And if I'm connected to my onboard avionics via something like FlightStream, you can push this directly to the panel. And if I'm connected to an onboard Wi-Fi like the Sentry, this can sync to across the different devices. So if I did this in this actual workflow, I would want to save this to my flights tab. And I could do that by tapping on the send to icon here. I could send that to my flights tab. And once that's sent to my flights tab, it will sync to my PIC's device as long as we're connected to Wi-Fi. I can see this approach and traffic pattern displayed. I'll zoom in to get a little more clarity. And if I'm connected to an ADS-B receiver, I can also pull up traffic using my map layer selector. It looks like at my current altitude, so I'm not flying at 12,000 feet or above, but it looks like at my current altitude, I shouldn't have any issues with traffic, and I should be able to get us safely onto the ground as quickly as possible to wait out the storm. From this screen, I can also pull up contact information and fuel prices for this field by opening up my airport information pane again. And this workflow I'm going to show you can be done before flight as part of pre-flight planning too. So I'll go ahead and open up my airport information tab. What I'm looking for is my fixed based operators tab. And I can see what current fuel prices are if this airport is reporting them. If I scroll down a little bit, I can even see if there are options to grab a bite to eat in case waiting out this storm may be a while. We don't want to just sit on the tarmac. I even have the ability to see if there are any reviews or comments about this restaurant, or pull up a phone number in case I need to call ahead, make a reservation, make sure they're still open. Oftentimes, the PIC will ask the passenger to help them identify and call out traffic during the flight. If you are using ForeFlight as a passenger or co-pilot, companion, and are connected to an onboard ADSB receiver like the Sentry, you can do this a little more proactively, um, as seeing specific traffic targets while flying is often easier said than done. When connected to a Sentry device or other ADSB receiver, you can display real time traffic targets by opening the traffic layer in the Map Layer selector. The number displayed above the traffic target is the vertical distance between you and the target in hundreds of feet. Tapping on any individual target will display more details of that specific target to include heading, speed, and for Pro Plus and above subscribers, you can see breadcrumbs that show where that traffic target has been up to 30 minutes to help you determine the type of flying that target has been doing and where they might be headed next. So, as you're sitting in the aircraft, if you are connected to the Sentry or other ADSB receiver, you can proactively monitor for traffic on a device, iPad or iPhone. And if something comes to your attention, maybe point that out to the PIC that they should be looking for traffic at 10 o'clock, 200 feet above, something like that. The last section of this presentation will be focused on how you can assist the pilot in command in an emergency situation. Effectively, we'll be putting all the other workflows we've talked about into action, and the idea is to do this as quickly and efficiently as possible. So far, what we're showing here, this is a relatively uneventful flight from State College, Pennsylvania, back to Northwest New Jersey. There are a few situational awareness tools I suggest making sure you always have toggled on. And personally, I would have these toggled on as the PIC, but as the passenger or co-pilot, there's no reason not to have these toggled on either. And these are own ship distance rings, glide advisor, and track vector. And you can make sure these are turned on in map settings. You can click our universal map settings. This is the gear icon in the maps tab. And this is something you'd probably want to enable prior to departing. Again, this might be something to add for a pre-departure checklist to make sure you have the settings set up the way you want them. The settings don't sync across devices. So this is something that you would want to set up, make sure is set up on any device you'll be using for the flight. You'll have to scroll down a little bit to find them. Here, I've toggled on my own ship distance rings. That's what the white ring around my green own ship is. And this will display a series of concentric rings around your aircraft to show either distance or time based on your airspeed. The distance shown here is 5, 10, and 25 nautical miles, but this can be customized to fit your preference. I'll go ahead and turn on my glide advisor next. And once the glide advisor is activated, I can see my glide range is presented on the map, and my optimal glide speed and glide ratio are displayed in the lower right-hand corner. The range ring, the glide advisor range ring, will update dynamically to account for winds, terrain, altitude, and speed. I'll turn on my track vector next. And the track vector will show a line representing your ground track at a customizable distance. Right now, it's a little difficult to see because of how my track vector is set, and I'm zoomed out pretty far. But once I zoom in, we'll be able to see that track vector. So in the scenario we're imagining, so again, uneventful flight from State College over to Northwest New Jersey, I went ahead and I toggled on some situational awareness tools that were my glide advisor, my own ship distance rings, and my track vector. I'm going to imagine that there is an emergency. In this case, it's an engine failure mid-flight. So the idea behind this is you can hopefully see as a passenger ways in which you can assist the PIC deal with this emergency. The very first thing I want to do is navigate over to my emergency checklist. I'll go ahead and tap on checklist. I'm going to start speaking a little more quickly to try to make it seem more like an emergency. So whatever the last checklist viewed is, that is what will be displayed. So I don't want to see my pre-flight inspection. I want to open up my emergency checklist. So I'll go ahead and tap on the emergency button. I see all my emergency checklists for this aircraft displayed. I'm going to look for the one that matches my emergency. We just had an engine failure. I'm going to go ahead and open up engine failure. I can start reading this checklist off for the PIC. I can complete items as we go. I can announce verbally airspeed, fuel shutoff valve, fuel selector valve, as they run through that checklist. Once the checklist is complete, let's assume that we didn't get the engine restarted. I need to start making preparations for an emergency landing. As long as my glide advisor is active, I can see my recommended glide speed displayed in that lower right-hand corner. Ideally, the PIC is well aware of what that is and has already pitched that glide speed, but if they haven't, I can announce to them it's 74 knots. I can also, using my glide advisor, I can see pretty clearly, are there airfields that we have a reasonable chance to make during our glide? I can pull up my flight category layer, since I did pack for my flight, if I'm worried about conditions. You may not be. You may just advise the PIC, or they may make the decision on their own to divert to the closest airfield. But if I wanted to, I could activate my I could go ahead and activate my flight categories, and it looks like everywhere the conditions are good, so I shouldn't have any surprise weather conditions. I've got 3 different airports that are near me. It's actually more than 3, but I have 3 different airports that are near me. I just flew over PS 12, which is now about 5 miles west of me. 22N is about 5 miles south of me, and 14N is dead ahead about 6 miles. So all 3 of those airports, we have PS 12, it's 22 November, and we have 14 November. All 3 of those are within my glide ring. So the PIC is going to make his or her call. What airport am I going to divert to? In our scenario, the pilot will announce what airport it is they'd like to divert to. In this case, we're going to divert to 22 November because that is the closest airport. It's just under 5 nautical miles, whereas the next closest one is probably about 6 or 7. So they've made that announcement. We're going to divert to 22 November. I can start to assist in this planning. I can tap on that airport just like I did before. It's the same workflow I did earlier. Now I'm just doing it more quickly, more efficiently, because I've practiced it. I've prepared this a little bit. I can pull up a lot of information here, but really all I'm concerned with is my frequencies. I can start changing the frequencies as needed, or I can advise the PIC of those frequency changes. As they change their course southbound to 22 November, I can then set a direct course into ForeFlight. Again, if need be, I can push this to the panel, but I can set this direct course in ForeFlight. If we're connected to the Sentry, I can cockpit share this so they can see that. That might be a step you probably wouldn't do in emergency, but it is available to you. So they now have this this new route, this direct to from current position to the airport to which they're diverting. Hopefully, they're starting to make that turn to the south. Because we're we're pretty close to this airport, we already see an alert telling us what the weather forecast is. Again, I'm less concerned with that. But I can see on my range ring, I've made that turn, my range ring and my track vector, that I'm just about 5 nautical miles out from this airport, but there is no north-south oriented runway. So I need to start lining up so that I can get down to runway 26 or runway 08. The passenger in the right seat, they can help maybe display a traffic pattern onto this map, maybe turn on traffic to increase situational awareness, get whatever is needed in that situation. You can combine this view with other layers if it's helpful. So in this case, I've turned on my satellite, my aerial layer, so that I can help identify features and landmarks that I'm seeing out of the cockpit to help orient the pilot to getting lined up onto one of those runways. I've enabled the obstacle layer as well. So in this case, the obstacles have changed color as we're descending in altitude, but our PIC has gotten themselves lined up on runway 26. The runway remains within our glide range, so we should make this landing. We should make this landing safely. Excuse me. We should make this landing safely. So one other setting I want to highlight here. If I go back, and actually this was on every time I showed the map, you'll notice for our runways, this is the runways at 22 November, I have them extended out. There is a setting that you can enable called extended center lines, which will allow you to display the center lines of those runways extended beyond their actual physical locations. So Hopefully, those combinations of tools and features and workflows can help you assist the PIC in the event of emergency and get everyone safely to their destination. So that brings me to an end of the webinar about ForeFlight for passengers and companions. And we should have some time left to answer some of the questions you may have asked during this webinar. So on your screen right now, you should see some links for some additional support options. We will be transitioning over to some Q&A right now, so you should see your screens change in just a moment to a live representation of my iPad. There we go, cool. So we had a handful of questions come in that we wanted to address to the entire group before moving on. If anything occurs to you in the next few minutes while I'm doing these demos, please feel free to use the Q&A tab at the bottom of the Zoom window. I can answer this question right away. We will be posting this seminar to our YouTube channel and on our foreflight.com/webinars page. So one of the first things that I wanted to demonstrate, I mentioned cockpit sharing several times. It's something that's tricky to demonstrate simply when you're looking at a single source, and you won't really be able to see it exactly right now. But you are looking at my iPad right now, those little magenta circles, that's where I'm touching the screen. I also have my iPhone open, and I have a route opened on ForeFlight on my iPhone, and I'm going to share it because I'm on the same Wi-Fi network to my iPad. And what you'll be able to see is, again, let's imagine the iPhone is the passenger, the iPad is the PIC. So on my iPhone, I've tapped on my flight plan drawer, I've tapped on the send to icon. And because I'm on the same Wi-Fi network, I can see my iPad. So I'm going to share a flight to my iPad, and you should see, and there it is. You see a confirmation on the PIC's iPad. In this case, it's mine, but it shows me that somebody is trying to share a flight with me. That's from my iPhone mini. Once I tap on view route, that flight has now been shared. That flight has now populated my map screen, and it's populated my flight plan drawer as well. So as the PIC, I have this route here. I can do whatever it is I'd like to do with this. I can make edits to this route. I can make changes. There's another question that came up about in-flight diversions and whether or not you need an active data connection. And generally speaking, you don't. What you may not have access to in-flight weather if you're not connected to an ADS-B receiver or anything like that. But as long as you have packed for the flight, you'll have access to the information you need to make a diversion along that route of flight. And the pack icon, you'll see that this just highlighted on my screen. It's this little suitcase with my exclamation point. If I tap on that, ForeFlight will check to see what information I need to download. This corridor here along my route, that's the corridor from which ForeFlight will pull information for the pack. And it pulls anything that intersects that corridor. So it's actually much larger than what it looks like. But I'll go ahead and pack for that. This may take too long to actually demonstrate live. I may have to cancel this in a moment. But once this is completely packed, I should be able to make those diversions without any problem. As long as I'm not diverting hundreds of miles away, that's what that corridor kind of sort of represents. You can also set alternate airports and stuff like that if that is going to be part of the way you fly. We had a question come in about settings, and it was specifically about on my screen, I had mentioned that I was hiding airspace above 15,000 feet. So I'm looking at my aeronautical map layer right here on the left-hand side of my screen. I have this little VFR settings button here. When I tap on that, I have all these quick filters to toggle things on, things like waypoints, things like nav aids. I can toggle those on and off. For the airspace specifically, if I tap on this ellipses at the bottom, this settings icon, and I scroll down, you'll see all these different settings here. I have my hide airspace option. So if I choose to, I can hide airspace. Let's hide airspace above 10,000 feet. And that will be saved whenever I open up my aeronautical map and I'm looking at my VFR view. If I want to, I can toggle back and forth between VFR and my different IFR options. This is the newer aeronautical map view. This was released several months ago, but not all users are completely have completely mastered it yet. But that's where I found, and that's where I used that setting. A question just came in about the best the best way to pull up a list of nearest airports, there's probably, honestly, I think the best way, I'll zoom in on right here. This is my location right now. I'm not in the aircraft. I'm not in the aircraft, obviously, but anywhere in the map where you tap and hold, this brings up effectively like a geographic search for this. If I tap on airports, those are the ones that are closest to that position where I tapped and held. So that's probably the simplest way to do it. And you can do that in the aircraft at altitude. You can do that while planning as well. And you'll notice that for each of those airfields, we have, let's look at any of these. We have Pippin York Ranch. You can see how far away it is in the direction. It's 3.9 miles to the west. So that's probably the simplest way. The simplest way to pull that up is to just go ahead, tap and hold on the map, tap all airports for that filter. There is, if you have your instrument panel open, there is an option on the instrument panel to set a nearest airport, but that will obviously only show you the nearest airport. So right now you can see that I'm 4.9 miles northwest of Austin Bergstrom. So in the instrument panel, if you tap on any of these, you can adjust which of these display. I'm going to turn this one back on to nearest airport. So when I'm flying, I don't forget, because I do prefer to have that one on. There's a question too that came in about if you're flying a route and you are not necessarily flying it the exact same way you planned it. So right now, this is the route I planned on my iPhone, and then I sent it to my iPad. Now, there's little things we can do. We can obviously adjust individual waypoints. We can add individual waypoints. But let's say we're just skipping a leg, or we're going to fly in a different way to get to a leg farther on our planned route. If we tap on our navlog, these are all the legs along our route of flight. If for some reason, let's say I'm not going to fly Georgetown to Amuse, that waypoint, I'm going to just go, I just want to fly direct this leg. If I tap on that icon there, I can do a direct route from my current position to that next waypoint. So this will replace what's in my route, my flight plan drawer, with a direct to that position, or I can just fly that leg, and this will delete the previous leg from my route and allow me to do that. The last thing I wanted to show is, I'm going to have to navigate away from ForeFlight to do this, but I had mentioned the idea of sharing checklists and things like that. Any way you can share a file with your iPad is you can do for sharing a checklist. So the simplest way is probably AirDrop or email, but there's anything you want. You can use Finder, you can plug it in with the USB, you can use a software called Apple Configurator. There's a lot of different things, but I want to show how you would do this with a checklist. So I'm going to I'm going to navigate away from ForeFlight and open up my Gmail. And you should see, let me close this, I'm sorry. This is the email I sent myself. This is attached checklist. I'm going to tap on this, and Gmail can't open this document. So this is how it will show up. I'm going to tap on send to, and this will be it should be all the apps on your iPad. I want to send this to ForeFlight, and it should automatically open. This is the checklist that I sent. So that's, when I talked about sharing checklists, that's probably the easiest way to do it is just email it. And if you're sharing it with multiple people, that's probably the simplest way to do it, is just email it to people. When they go into their email, again, I use Gmail, but it should work the exact same way with any email software. Just tap on that and then open with, and then select ForeFlight, and this will automatically open that document. Yeah, so that brings us to the end. That is the summary. I just want to double check, make sure there's no questions that I've missed. I think I've got everything. Yeah, so that brings us to the end of our webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And like I said, this will be posted to our YouTube channel as well as foreflight.com/webinars. And if you need any help with anything, if you have any questions or suggestions for us, you can always contact us at team@foreflight.com. We're always on frequency. We're always glad to hear from people, and hopefully you're not having any issues, but if you are, hopefully we'll be able to take care of those for you as quickly as possible. So I hope everyone else enjoys the rest of your day, and thank you for flying with ForeFlight.